In the year 1821, as the dust of revolution settled and Mexico declared its independence from Spain, the land of Texas stood at the edge of a shifting frontier. Settlers, traders, and soldiers drifted across its vast fields and thick pine forests, each carrying hopes of fortune or fears of ruin. Along dirt roads and at dimly lit taverns, whispers carried a name that struck both fascination and dread: the McCullen Triplets. Pearl, Priscilla, and Phoebe were only 18, yet their reputation reached further than most men twice their age. Some called them beautiful beyond measure, their faces nearly identical but marked by subtle differences that told of distinct tempers. Others swore they were too clever, too bold, and too ruthless for the narrow confines of frontier society. To some, they were victims of hardship, young women surviving in a cruel land. To others, they were a storm no law could tame. But before we dive deeper into their untold story, let me remind you to subscribe to the channel, so you won't miss the rest of this tale that history itself tried to bury. The land around them shaped their destiny. Texas in 1821 was neither fully Mexican nor yet American. Spanish rule had collapsed, but Mexican authority was fragile, and settlers of Anglo origin often ignored the distant orders of Mexico City. Communities like Nacogdoches stood as crossroads of cultures. Spanish-speaking ranchers lived beside American traders. Enslaved Africans worked under both, and Comanche horsemen haunted the edges of settlements. It was a world of constant negotiation, where survival required wit as much as muscle. Into this uncertain world were born the Triplets, daughters of Jonathan McCullen, a trader who had once been respected. His downfall began with debts owed to ranchers and accusations of selling secrets to rivals. Though never proven, the stain clung to him, and whispers followed the family wherever they went. Margaret, their mother, raised her daughters under the shadow of disgrace, drilling into them the necessity of sharp minds and sharper tongues. Pearl, the eldest by mere minutes, possessed a silver voice that could charm or condemn. She read people as though they were open ledgers, and her words often bent situations in her favor. Priscilla, bold and fiery, preferred confrontation. She had little patience for the quiet expectations of women, and less still for men who sought to contain her spirit. Phoebe, the quietest of the three, seemed almost withdrawn, yet her silence was deceptive. She watched, listened, and remembered, storing away secrets like a merchant with precious goods. Together they formed a bond both unbreakable and unsettling. Where one sister faltered, the others stepped forward, and soon they learned that unity made them formidable. Travelers at the time described seeing them at community gatherings, their identical figures moving through candle-lit halls as though shadows of each other. Conversations hushed when they passed. The older women frowned, whispering prayers, while young men stared too long, not realizing until too late that the Triplets noticed every glance and used it to their advantage. They were not cruel for the sake of cruelty. At least, not at first. Their actions were born of survival, honed by years of humiliation endured at their father's disgrace. When neighbors withheld food or mocked their mother, the girls learned that charm could open doors and cunning could secure a meal where pity failed. In such a land, weakness meant hunger, and hunger meant death. Yet there was something more, an ambition growing quietly within them, an ambition not content with mere survival. As 1821 dawned with the promise of new beginnings for Texas, the McCullen Triplets saw not chaos, but opportunity. While others prayed for stability, they prepared to seize the instability for themselves. For now, their story is only beginning, with the dust of their reputation just starting to settle over the pine forests and dirt roads. But those who crossed their path would soon learn. The Triplets were not to be underestimated, for every whisper carried truth, and every truth carried danger. And so, as Texas entered a new chapter of history, so too did Pearl, Priscilla, and Phoebe, young, cunning, and already too dangerous for the history books that preferred silence over scandal. The McCullen name once carried weight along the rough trails of East Texas, but by the time Pearl, Priscilla, and Phoebe turned 10, that weight had become a burden. Their father, Jonathan McCullen, had once been a trader who strode with confidence through markets in Louisiana and Nacogdoches. He was known for his knack of acquiring rare goods, bolts of cloth from New Orleans, iron tools from the East, even barrels of whiskey smuggled past watchful eyes. Yet his ambition outpaced his sense, debts mounted, accusations of treachery followed, and soon respectable men would not deal with him. At first, neighbors whispered that Jonathan had sold secrets about cattle routes to rival traders. Others swore he had cheated Mexican officials out of their share of taxes. None of it was ever proven, but in a land where reputation meant more than law, the stain was permanent. A man accused of dishonor, even without evidence, found doors slammed in his face. And those doors, once closed to Jonathan, closed to his wife and daughters as well. Margaret McCullen bore the shame with quiet determination. She had grown up the daughter of a Presbyterian preacher in Kentucky, stern in discipline but unshakable in faith. Yet on the harsh Texas frontier, sermons offered little protection. She drilled her daughters not with prayers alone but with lessons of survival. "You will be overlooked, dismissed, perhaps even mocked," she would say as she stitched their worn dresses by lamplight. "But you will never be helpless. Learn what others ignore. Watch what they reveal, and use it." Pearl absorbed her mother's words with sharp focus. She studied how men spoke in the tavern, how one small flattery could loosen a tongue, or one insult could draw out truths better left hidden. She learned early that persuasion was a kind of weapon, and she wielded it with skill that startled even her mother. Priscilla, restless and bold, chafed against the confinement of domestic chores. She once slammed a bucket down in the yard, declaring, "I'd rather face a wild horse than scrub another pot." Her father, half drunk at the time, laughed and handed her a rope. To everyone's surprise, she managed to steady a young colt that had bucked stronger men. From then on, Priscilla's defiance was no longer dismissed as childish stubbornness, but feared as reckless courage. Phoebe, the quietest, gave little away. While her sisters argued or mocked their neighbors, she listened. At church gatherings, she would sit silently, her eyes fixed on the lips of every speaker, committing their words to memory. Later, when a dispute arose about who had promised what, Phoebe's recollection was flawless. "You said it yourself, Mr. Holloway, last Sunday after the sermon," she would remark, her calm voice disarming even the proudest rancher. What seemed like shyness was in truth precision. She stored every detail like a ledger of debts and credits. The family's hardship carved into them a unity sharper than blood alone could provide. When food was scarce, they learned to stretch cornmeal and wild greens into meals that filled without satisfying. When neighbors insulted them, the sisters shared the bitterness among themselves, vowing silently that they would repay every slight in time. Yet amid the hardship, there were glimpses of tenderness. Jonathan, despite his failures, sometimes softened with his daughters. He would sit on the porch in the humid summer evenings, a jug of whiskey at his side, and tell them stories of lands far east, of bustling cities where no one knew or cared about debts. "Out there," he slurred one night, "a man or woman can reinvent themselves." The sisters listened, and though they knew his words were soaked in liquor, they believed the possibility of reinvention was real. Still, as his debts deepened and Margaret's health grew fragile, the burden of survival shifted more and more onto the girls. By the time they neared womanhood, they understood the world would not grant them safety. They would have to seize it. And in Nacogdoches, a settlement buzzing with ambition and suspicion alike, their chance to test those lessons was drawing near. By 1821, Nacogdoches stood as a curious blend of old Spanish traditions and new American ambition. Its dusty streets carried the clatter of mule carts and the scent of leather, tobacco, and frying maize. Traders from Louisiana mingled with Mexican ranchers, and native families still appeared in town with goods to barter. The settlement was small, yet its crossroads nature made it restless, a place where whispers could grow into reputations, and reputations could make or ruin a life. When the McCullen sisters first set foot there, they drew attention instantly, not merely for their identical faces, but for the way they carried themselves. Pearl held her chin high, eyes darting sharply over faces as though weighing their worth. Priscilla walked with the stride of someone unafraid of obstacles. Phoebe, a step behind, gave the impression of meekness, but her quiet gaze unnerved those who caught it. At Sunday gatherings outside the rough-hewn church, matrons watched the girls with pursed lips. "They're too proud for their own good," whispered one woman, adjusting her shawl. Another muttered, "Beauty is a blessing when tempered with humility. Those three have none." Yet the younger men were not so quick to condemn. Eyes followed them, lingering, despite warnings from mothers and fathers. It was at one such gathering that Sheriff Elias Crow first noticed them. Tall, broad-shouldered, with streaks of grey already lining his dark hair, Crow was a man both respected and feared. He enforced order in Nacogdoches with a stern hand, though he was not above looking the other way when bribes or favours suited the town's peace. As he watched the triplets, his sharp instincts told him they were trouble. "Too much alike to be ordinary," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his hat against the sun. Another figure soon crossed their path, Maria Delgado, a seamstress of Mexican descent, who lived above her small shop on the plaza. Maria was known for her sharp eye and her frank tongue. When she measured cloth for the sisters' dresses, she leaned closer and whispered, "You carry fire, all three of you. Fire warms, but fire burns. Choose carefully which." Pearl smiled faintly, as if amused by the warning, but Phoebe caught the seriousness in Maria's tone. Then there was Thomas Whitfield, a young rancher whose family owned grazing land on the edge of town. Broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with earnest blue eyes, he was unprepared for the force of Pearl's presence. At a dance held in a barn lit by lanterns, he asked her for a turn. Pearl accepted with a grace that stunned him, her words dripping with flattery one moment, and challenged the next. "Do you always stumble over your words, or only when you face someone unafraid to look you straight in the eye?" she teased. His awkward smile revealed both discomfort and fascination. The sisters quickly learned that Nacogdoches was fertile ground for their ambitions. Gossip flowed as freely as ale in the tavern, and every story told at dusk by the fire pit carried farther than intended. If one family quarreled with another, Pearl stored the details. Priscilla sharpened the conflict, and Phoebe listened for what went unsaid. Yet beneath the attention they commanded, tension brewed. Sheriff Crow's suspicion lingered. Maria's caution hinted at unseen dangers, and Thomas Whitfield's growing attachment threatened to entangle him in games he did not yet understand. The sisters, however, were unshaken. To them, the town felt like a stage, and its people like players in a drama they intended to direct. But in a place where reputations meant survival, the triplets' boldness would not go unanswered. Nacogdoches was a town that tested every newcomer, and soon the McCullen sisters would face their first real challenge. By the time autumn winds swept through Nacogdoches, carrying the scent of pine and smoke, the triplets had already unsettled the quiet rhythm of town life. Social gatherings, once predictable and polite, began to shift whenever Pearl, Priscilla, and Phoebe arrived. Their presence alone was enough to unnerve matrons and intrigue restless young men. But it was not beauty alone that stirred the town. It was the audacity with which they bent every custom to their advantage. At a harvest dance in a lantern-lit barn, whispers chased them before they even entered. Pearl moved through the crowd with practiced poise, her eyes quick to settle on conversations ripe for exploitation. She leaned close to Mrs. Holloway, whose husband was rumored to be hiding debts. "How fortunate your household must be, always so well provided for," Pearl remarked sweetly, her tone sharp enough to draw a blush. Nearby, listeners caught the sting, and by morning, the Holloway name was tangled in gossip. Priscilla, less subtle, chose her battles openly. When a rancher's son tried to corner her near the cider barrel, she shoved him back, her voice cutting through the music. "You mistake me for someone who fears your father's cattle more than my own pride." The boy's friends laughed nervously, while others exchanged startled glances. No woman spoke so plainly, not in front of the whole town. But Priscilla thrived on confrontation, her defiance burning brighter than the lanterns overhead. Phoebe, in her quiet way, wove through conversations unnoticed, gathering fragments of secrets. She sat beside Maria Delgado and asked simple questions about the prices of cloth and the moods of officials passing through town. Men speak too freely when they think women are not listening, Phoebe murmured, her calm tone carrying a quiet warning. Maria studied her with furrowed brow, realizing this soft-spoken girl was far more dangerous than she appeared. By the end of the night, laughter was strained, alliances shifted, and families whispered anxiously about what the sisters might do next. The backlash came swiftly. A group of influential families, tired of being humiliated, conspired to silence the girls through ridicule. At the next Sunday gathering, Mrs. Holloway and her allies spread mocking comments about the McCullens' ragged dresses and their father's disgrace. One matron sneered loudly, "Pride sits poorly on borrowed cloth." The words stung, and for a moment silence hung heavy around the sisters. But Pearl recovered first, her voice carrying across the crowd with a calm that cut sharper than anger. "Better borrowed cloth than borrowed honor," she replied, eyes fixed on the accuser. Gasps rippled through the assembly. Priscilla stepped forward, daring anyone else to laugh. Phoebe remained still, yet her faint smile told the crowd she was memorizing every insult for later use. The attempt to shame them backfired. The very families who sought to tarnish their image found themselves the subject of sharper gossip in the tavern that evening. Men chuckled at Mrs. Holloway's red face, and young women whispered about the boldness of the triplets. The sisters had turned humiliation into a weapon, and their enemies looked like fools. Sheriff Elias Crow watched this escalation with growing concern. He confronted them outside the plaza, his voice heavy with warning. "You girls are stirring more trouble than you can handle. Pride will get you crushed in this town." Priscilla's eyes flashed as she retorted, "Or it will get us remembered." Crow studied them in silence before shaking his head. Remembered isn't always the same as safe. His boots echoed on the dirt road as he left, but his words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Despite the sheriff's warning, the triplets only grew bolder. Each gathering became an arena where they sharpened their skills in manipulation, defiance, and observation. Their reputation as dangerous young women spread, whispered not only in Nacogdoches, but in the ranches and settlements beyond. And soon, their rising influence would draw them into conflicts that reached far beyond gossip and dances. The first true test of the sisters' growing influence came in the form of a land dispute that set Nacogdoches buzzing. A wealthy rancher named Samuel Briggs had died suddenly, leaving behind acres of fertile grazing land near the river. His death sparked a quarrel between his widow, Eleanor, and his estranged nephew, Caleb Briggs, each claiming rightful inheritance. With no clear will and the Mexican authorities distant, the town's leaders prepared to settle the matter through a public hearing. For most, it was a matter of law and family honor. For the McCullen sisters, it was opportunity. Pearl was the first to see it. "Land makes power," she told her sisters as they sat in their small cabin outside town. "Whoever controls that ranch will control more than cattle. They'll control respect. And respect, sisters, is something we can use." Priscilla's eyes glinted with eagerness. "So we pick a side?" Pearl shook her head. "No. We play both until one becomes useful." Phoebe said little, but when her sisters turned to her, she spoke softly. "Then we must listen more closely than ever before. Both will reveal their weaknesses." In the days leading up to the hearing, the sisters placed themselves in the center of the quarrel. Pearl visited Eleanor Briggs under the pretense of offering comfort. She praised the widow's resilience, her words honeyed but edged with calculation. "A woman who keeps a ranch alive after a man's passing deserves more than inheritance. She deserves loyalty," Pearl murmured, earning Eleanor's grateful tears. Meanwhile, Priscilla sought out Caleb Briggs at the tavern. He was a broad man with a short temper, quick to insult anyone who doubted his claim. When Priscilla challenged him, saying, "A man who must shout to prove himself has already lost," Caleb slammed his fist on the table. Yet even in his anger, he listened as she suggested that the town respected strength over sentiment. She left him seething but uncertain, her words echoing louder than he admitted. Phoebe watched quietly from the edges. She listened to ranch hands gossip about unpaid debts and to servants whisper of Eleanor's desperation. She noted every detail, storing them like weapons for later use. By the time the hearing arrived, the Triplets had already secured a reputation as voices worth hearing. The townsfolk packed the square, buzzing with speculation. Sheriff Elias Crow stood at the front, his stern eyes sweeping the crowd. Though he disliked the sisters' meddling, he could not deny their influence. When Eleanor spoke, her voice wavered with emotion. "I tended the land when Samuel was sick. I fed the workers, paid what debts I could. This ranch is mine by right of toil," Caleb countered with force. "Blood makes claim. I am his only kin, and no woman can hold what is meant for a man's hands." Murmurs rippled through the crowd at his blunt dismissal. That was when Pearl rose, uninvited, her voice smooth and steady. "If land belongs only to those with strength, then who has shown more? The man who boasts of blood, or the woman who fed a ranch while sickness consumed her husband?" Gasps followed her words, the audacity of her interruption shocking the assembly. Priscilla stepped forward too, her tone sharper. "Or perhaps neither deserves it. Perhaps land belongs to those bold enough to claim it, no matter the custom." Phoebe did not speak, but her stillness was felt as much as her sister's fire. Sheriff Crow narrowed his eyes. "This hearing is no place for your games. Speak again out of turn, and you'll regret it." Yet the damage was done. The sisters had shifted the tide. Eleanor stood taller after Pearl's defense, while Caleb faltered, his bluster suddenly uncertain. The crowd buzzed with divided loyalties, and whispers spread that the McCullen girls had more sway than either claimant. When the hearing ended unresolved, one thing was clear. The Briggs dispute had become more than a family quarrel. It was a stage for the Triplets' growing power, and their enemies were taking notice. The chaos of the Briggs land dispute lingered long after the hearing ended, stirring gossip and tension throughout Nacogdoches. Families took sides, friendships soured, and the town square echoed with arguments that rarely found resolution. It was precisely the kind of unrest the Mexican authorities feared, and word of the sisters' meddling reached ears far beyond the settlement. In early winter, Don Rafael Herrera arrived. A captain in the Mexican army, he carried himself with the dignity of a man who had survived both war and politics. His uniform, though travel-worn, bore polished buttons and a sash that marked his authority. His dark eyes missed little, and his stern posture spoke of discipline. To the people of Nacogdoches, his presence was both a reassurance and a warning. The sisters first encountered him at the plaza, where merchants displayed winter goods and townsfolk clustered in wary conversation. Don Rafael dismounted his horse with practiced grace, scanning the crowd before his gaze fixed on the Triplets. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if already aware of their reputation. "You are the McCullen sisters," he said in Spanish-accented English, his tone measured. "I have heard your names more often than the names of men who claim to lead this town." Pearl tilted her head, her voice smooth. "A woman is remembered when she gives people something worth remembering." His expression hardened. "Or when she disturbs the peace." Priscilla stepped forward, unflinching. Peace is fragile when it cannot endure a woman's voice. The crowd hushed, waiting for Don Rafael's response. For a moment his jaw tightened, but then he gave a short, humorless laugh. Boldness is often mistaken for strength. Yet boldness without restraint leads only to ruin. Phoebe spoke softly, her tone calm but piercing. Restraint can be a prison. Sometimes ruin is another name for freedom. The exchange rippled through the gathering, fueling both admiration and unease. Sheriff Crow, standing nearby, muttered low enough for only Raphael to hear. "I warned you they'd test any man who tried to corral them." That evening, Don Rafael summoned a meeting at the alcalde's house. Local leaders and ranchers crowded inside, the air heavy with smoke and suspicion. "These sisters," he declared, "have stirred quarrels that divide the town. They may not carry weapons, but their tongues are sharper than knives. If left unchecked, they will weaken authority in this region at a time when Mexico can least afford instability." Eleanor Briggs, still grateful for Pearl's defense at the hearing, raised her voice timidly. "They only speak truths others fear to speak. Is that a crime?" Caleb Briggs scoffed. "Truth? They twist words like gamblers twist dice. They humiliated me before the whole town." Don Rafael listened, then turned to Sheriff Crow. "You know them best. Tell me plain, are they a threat?" Crow rubbed his jaw, his voice low and weary. "They're clever. Too clever. Not violent, not yet. But they set sparks where others see only kindling. That's enough to burn a town to the ground." Outside, the sisters walked together beneath the cold night sky, their breath visible in the air. Pearl's eyes shone with determination. "He sees us clearly. That makes him dangerous." Priscilla clenched her fists. "Let him come." "I'd rather face a soldier than a coward hiding behind gossip." Phoebe's gaze lingered on the flickering lanterns of the alcalde's house. "He is not a man of gossip. He is a man of law, and law will not forgive what we do." Their voices carried quietly into the night, but the echo of Don Rafael's arrival was far louder. For the first time, their bold games had drawn the scrutiny of an authority beyond the town itself, and though they walked away unbowed, they knew the stage of their defiance had widened. The presence of Don Rafael Herrera cast a long shadow over Nacogdoches, but the triplets knew better than to shrink from it. If anything, his arrival only deepened the fractures already running through the town. Texas in 1821 was a land split by culture, ambition, and survival. Anglo settlers, many from the American South, clung to their traditions and bristled at Mexican oversight. Mexican ranchers guarded their lands and customs, resentful of newcomers who showed little respect. Farmers struggled against wealthy cattlemen, while traders played both sides for profit. It was a place where every handshake could mask a blade. The sisters saw opportunity in division. Pearl whispered into ears at the tavern, nudging resentment where it already festered. "Have you noticed," she said to an American settler, "that Mexican officials take more from your pocket than they ever give back?" The man nodded bitterly, repeating her words later as though they were his own. On another day, she leaned toward a rancher of Mexican blood. "These Americans," she murmured, "pretend loyalty, but they see Texas only as land to seize." Again, the seed took root. Priscilla preferred sharper tools. When two ranch hands, one Anglo, one Mexican, quarreled over a boundary fence, she stepped between them, daring either to strike. "Fight here and now if you must," she challenged, "but remember that the one who starts a brawl loses before it begins." Both men backed down, their pride wounded, their anger redirected, not at each other, but at the bold woman who exposed their weakness. Phoebe, as always, worked in silence. She lingered in Maria Delgado's shop, feigning interest in bolts of cloth while listening to passing customers. Through Maria, she gained access to whispers of Mexican officials who fretted about rebellion and settlers who planned secret alliances. One afternoon, Maria confronted her gently. "You drink words as if they were water, Nina." "But too much water can drown." Phoebe's calm reply chilled her. "Only if one forgets how to breathe." The divide in Nacogdoches deepened. Conversations in the plaza turned sharper. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and rumors spread faster than goods along the trade routes. Some credited the sisters for exposing truths others ignored. Others blamed them for inflaming tensions. Sheriff Crow saw it clearly. Meeting them outside the tavern one evening, he spoke with quiet fury. "You think you're clever, stirring both sides, but you're playing with fire in a town built of timber." Pearl met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps fire is the only thing that clears away rot." His hand tightened on his belt. "And perhaps it burns everything worth saving. Remember that before you set another spark." Even Thomas Whitfield, once dazzled by Pearl's charm, began to sense danger. Watching her laugh with traders, while men leaned too eagerly to hear her, he felt unease knotting in his chest. One night, he confronted her. "Do you care about any of the words you plant, or are they only games to you?" Pearl's smile was faint, her voice almost tender. "Games, Thomas? Do you call survival a game? If I speak and men listen, that is not play, it is power, and power is the only safety left to us." His silence lingered long after she left, his heart torn between admiration and dread. By winter's end, Nacogdoches was no longer the quiet settlement it had been. The triplets had not created the divisions, but they had sharpened them. Factions formed, tempers flared, and trust withered. The sisters thrived in the turmoil, their names now spoken not just with curiosity but with open fear. Yet even as they wielded influence, shadows gathered. The more they stoked unrest, the more inevitable it became that betrayal would follow. As winter thawed into the damp chill of early spring, the tension in Nacogdoches no longer smouldered quietly. It hissed and crackled, waiting for the first spark to leap into open flame. The triplets had grown accustomed to whispers trailing them, but now those whispers carried a sharper edge. Some spoke with admiration, others with resentment, yet all agreed on one thing. The McCullen sisters were no longer merely strange newcomers. They were a force changing the town itself. Among those most entangled in their influence was Thomas Whitfield. Once smitten by Pearl's quick wit and luminous presence, he had watched her charm others with the same words she once offered him. Jealousy gnawed at him, but worse still was the realization that he had been used. His name, his family's standing, even his affection had been tools in her games. One evening, after a gathering where Pearl had drawn laughter and eager attention from a circle of ranchers, Thomas confronted her beneath the dim glow of a lantern outside the barn. His voice trembled, not with fear but with wounded pride. "Tell me, Pearl, was there ever a moment you spoke to me as myself, not as a pawn in your schemes?" Pearl's eyes softened briefly, though her tone remained measured. "You mistake clarity for cruelty. I spoke to you as I speak to everyone, with purpose. If you thought yourself exempt, that was your own dream, not my promise." His breath caught and the silence between them grew heavy. Finally, his voice cracked. "Then you are colder than I believed. I thought I saw a heart behind the words." Pearl's gaze flickered, perhaps betraying the faintest trace of conflict, but she turned away. A heart without armor is a grave waiting to be filled. "I will not dig that hole for myself." Thomas left with bitterness curdling inside him. By morning his hurt had hardened into anger, and his words spilled into the ears of anyone willing to listen. "They twist every man's weakness," he told his friends at the tavern. "Pearl used me, and she'll use the rest of you. Those sisters care for nothing but their own power." The gossip spread like wildfire. Young men who once admired the sisters began to boast of resisting their charms. Mothers repeated Thomas's words with satisfaction, claiming they had always known the triplets would bring disgrace. Even Sheriff Crow, who had long distrusted them, found in Thomas's accusations confirmation of his own suspicions. Priscilla bristled at the betrayal. "Let him sulk like a wounded pup," she spat. "If a man cannot endure the truth, he deserves the sting of it." Phoebe, however, sensed the deeper danger. "He speaks not only from hurt, but from pride. Pride spreads faster than pity. His bitterness will stain us more than his love ever raised us." Pearl remained outwardly calm, though her nights grew restless. In private, she admitted quietly, "I did not wish him harm. But I will not beg forgiveness for surviving the only way I know." Still, the damage was done. Invitations to gatherings grew fewer, and whispers sharpened into accusations. Where once the sisters' presence commanded fascination, now it provoked unease. Their enemies seized the chance to point at Thomas's words as proof of what they had long warned. Yet even in betrayal, the sisters found resolve. If affection could turn so easily into venom, then affection was a luxury they could not afford. "Let him speak," Pearl said at last, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed fatigue. "Words are weapons. He has chosen his. We will sharpen ours." The sisters stood united once more, but the crack Thomas had opened would not easily close. Betrayal, once tasted, lingered on the tongue, and in Nacogdoches tongues never ceased to wag. Spring rains turned the dirt streets of Nacogdoches into sticky clay, yet the town buzzed with anticipation. A theft had shaken the community. One of the merchants, Miguel Ortega, claimed that valuable tools had been stolen from his shop. Suspicion quickly fell on a poor drifter named Henry Dobbs, a man with no family, no allies, and little more than a ragged coat to his name. For some, his guilt was certain before any hearing. For others, the accusations smelled of convenience. The alcalde declared a public trial, and the townsfolk gathered eagerly, treating it as spectacle. Sheriff Elias Crow stood firm at the front, arms crossed, while Don Rafael Herrera observed with grim detachment. The trial was meant to be swift, but nothing in Nacogdoches remained simple once the McCullen sisters arrived. Pearl leaned toward Priscilla and Phoebe as they made their way through the crowd. This is no trial of Henry Dobbs. This is a trial of influence. Watch who believes, who doubts, and who dares to speak. When Ortega presented his accusation, his voice rose with righteous certainty. I saw Dobbs near my shop that night. He has no work, no home. Who else could it be? Dobbs, gaunt and trembling, shook his head desperately. I swear I never touched a thing that wasn't mine. I was seeking shelter from the rain, nothing more. The crowd murmured with doubt, but before anyone else could rise, Pearl's voice cut through. Strange, Senor Ortega. You say you saw him near your shop that night, yet you claim it was dark and storming. Tell us then, was your sight keener than the lightning? Gasps rippled and Ortega flushed red. Are you accusing me of lying? Pearl smiled faintly. I accuse no one. I only ask that justice not be bound by assumption. Priscilla stepped forward next, her voice sharp as a blade. If a man's poverty alone makes him guilty, then every poor soul in this town should prepare for the gallows. Is that the law you follow? The word struck hard, and even those who had whispered Dobbs's guilt began to murmur uneasily. Phoebe, quiet until now, raised her calm voice. Sometimes the easiest suspect is the least likely. A thief who wishes to hide will not linger in plain sight, but a man seeking shelter will stand where the rain drives him. The alcalde frowned, uneasy at their interference. Sheriff Crow narrowed his eyes, muttering to Don Raphael, See? They twist the crowd with words alone. Raphael's reply was low and clipped. Words, yes, but words can build walls as well as tear them down. In the end, Henry Dobbs was not convicted. Lacking proof beyond Ortega's accusation, the alcalde dismissed the charge. Dobbs wept openly, falling to his knees in gratitude. But though he was spared, the true verdict of the trial was clear. The McCullen sisters had once again bent justice to their will. That evening, whispers filled the tavern. Some praised the sisters for defending a helpless man, calling them champions of fairness. Others accused them of undermining authority, claiming their meddling encouraged lawlessness. Sheriff Crow confronted them as they left the plaza, his voice heavy with anger. Do you know what you've done? You've turned justice into a stage for your clever speeches. Today it was a thief. Tomorrow, who knows? You bend the law like a branch, and one day it will snap. Priscilla met his fury head-on. Perhaps the law deserves to bend if it cannot stand against a simple question. Pearl added softly, Justice is not weakened by doubt. It is strengthened. Unless, of course, it was never just at all. Crow glared at them, his silence more dangerous than any outburst. He turned and walked away, leaving them with the weight of his warning. The trial had ended, but its echoes would linger. The sisters had proven before the whole town that their voices could sway judgment itself, and for men of power, that was a threat too great to ignore. The trial of Henry Dobbs had cemented what many already feared. The McCullen sisters could bend the course of justice with nothing more than their voices. Some townsfolk admired them, others cursed them, but all acknowledged their influence. For Pearl, Priscilla, and Phoebe, however, Nacogdoches was beginning to feel too small. Their ambitions, once bound by survival, now reached beyond the pine forests and clay roads of the settlement. One night, as the sisters gathered in their cabin, the rain tapping against the roof, Pearl laid out her thoughts. We have shown that we can sway men's minds here, but minds alone are not enough. To endure, we need wealth. Land, trade, silver, all the things that buy power. Priscilla leaned forward eagerly. Then let us seize them. This town is but a stepping stone. Smugglers cross the border every month with goods worth fortunes. Why should we not claim our share? Phoebe, seated quietly by the hearth, raised her eyes. Smugglers bring more than goods. They bring danger. Mexican soldiers, angry ranchers, betrayal. If we step into that world, we must be ready to pay the cost. Pearl nodded thoughtfully. Every path carries a cost. The question is only whether the price is worth the gain. Over the following weeks, the sisters tested their reach. Pearl struck conversations with traders traveling from Louisiana, hinting at opportunities for discreet partnerships. Priscilla shadowed ranch hands in taverns, pressing for information about cattle routes and guarded shipments. Phoebe listened to Maria Delgado's quiet warnings about soldiers patrolling more frequently. One evening, a smuggler known as Ruiz crossed their path. His reputation was built on daring runs through the Sabine River, bringing contraband whiskey, rifles, and cloth past the eyes of soldiers. Meeting him in the corner of a tavern, Pearl wasted no time. "You profit because you take risks. We can make those risks smaller for you, with information, with influence, and in return we share in the reward." Ruiz studied her, amused. "3 young women who think they can outwit soldiers and ranchers alike. You have fire, señorita, but fire burns quickly." Priscilla's eyes flashed. "Fire spreads, and it consumes whatever stands in its path." His laugh was low, but not dismissive. "Perhaps. But know this. Once you step into such dealings, there is no turning back. You will have enemies not just in this town, but across every road you walk." When he left, Phoebe whispered, "He is right. If we go further, we will never again be unseen." Pearl answered firmly, "Then let us make certain we are unforgettable instead." Yet obstacles rose quickly. Rumors of their dealings reached the ears of Don Rafael Herrera, who was already wary of their influence. He tightened patrols, questioned traders, and made his presence felt at every gathering. Sheriff Crow, too, seemed more watchful, his gaze lingering longer whenever the sisters crossed his path. Even among the townsfolk, admiration soured into unease. Some muttered that the sisters sought to profit from lawlessness, that they would bring ruin upon Nacogdoches with their endless schemes. Maria Delgado, torn between caution and affection, confronted Phoebe directly. "You are playing a game with soldiers and knives, Nina. One misstep, and no words will save you." Phoebe's quiet reply was steady. "Words are only the beginning. We are not afraid of the rest." The sisters pressed forward, but the risks grew heavier with each step. Nacogdoches, once merely a stage for gossip and rivalry, had become too small for the scale of their ambition. And as they looked beyond the town's limits, their enemies sharpened their knives, waiting for the moment to strike. The sisters had chosen their path, but the price of that choice was already beginning to rise. The sisters' ambitions had carried them further than most dared to tread, but ambition seldom travels without shadow. Don Rafael Herrera had tolerated their interference long enough. For weeks he had watched, listened, and gathered accounts of their dealings with traders and smugglers. At first he dismissed them as clever girls stirring gossip, but now, with unrest rising in Nacogdoches, he knew they were something more, a threat to order itself. Their confrontation came not in the plaza or at a gathering, but on the edge of town, where pine trees thickened and the air smelled of damp earth. Don Rafael intercepted them as they walked together, his horse stamping impatiently behind him. His uniform gleamed faintly in the fading light, a stark reminder that he carried not only his own authority, but the weight of Mexico's rule. "You trespass too far," he said firmly, his Spanish accent sharpening every syllable. "Words are one thing. Schemes with smugglers, whispers that stir rebellion, these are another. I will not allow it." Pearl stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Allow? Don Rafael, you mistake us for subjects begging permission. We have only spoken truths. If truth weakens your order, perhaps it was fragile to begin with." His jaw tightened. "Do not test me, señorita. I have brought down men far stronger than you, men with rifles, not ribbons." Priscilla's laughter rang harsh in the quiet air. "And yet it is ribbons you fear most. Strange, isn't it, Captain, that 3 women unsettle your soldiers more than any outlaw?" Raphael's eyes flared with anger. "Do not confuse boldness with invincibility. I could have you arrested this night, dragged from this town in chains, and no one would lift a hand to stop me." Phoebe, silent until then, raised her gaze steadily. "Perhaps no one would stop you, but they would remember, and memory can be sharper than iron. One day men will whisper that Rafael Herrera feared not outlaws, but women with words." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the restless snort of Rafael's horse. His pride wrestled with his restraint, his sense of duty with the sting of their defiance. Finally he leaned closer, his voice low and deliberate. "You mistake my patience for weakness, but patience has limits. Push me further, and I will see to it you are gone from this town, banished from every settlement until there is no place left for you to rest." Pearl's eyes gleamed, her tone measured. Exile is only a threat to those afraid of the road. We have walked hard paths before. We will walk them again if we must. Raphael studied them for a long moment, then straightened. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, though he did not draw it. Very well, you have chosen your path, but know this. When it ends, it will not be I who bends. It will be you. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and the faint echo of hooves fading into the trees. For a moment the sisters stood in silence, Priscilla's fists clenched with restless energy. I would have welcomed his chains just to spit in his face as he locked them. Pearl exhaled slowly, her expression unreadable. No. Chains are for the careless. We cannot afford carelessness now. Phoebe's eyes followed the path where Raphael had vanished. He will come again. And next time, he will not speak first. The sisters walked back toward town with heavy steps, the air around them thick with the knowledge that their defiance had crossed a threshold. They had stood their ground against Mexico's authority itself, and such defiance would not go unanswered. The sisters had long thrived by pitting factions against one another, but now the tide shifted. For the first time, those who despised them found common cause. Don Raphael's anger, Sheriff Elias Crow's suspicion, and Thomas Whitfield's wounded pride converged into something far more dangerous than gossip, an alliance built on the single desire to see the McCullen sisters undone. It began quietly. Raphael met Crow under the cover of dusk at the alcalde's house. The flicker of lamplight revealed their tense faces as they spoke in low tones. "You've let them run wild too long," Raphael pressed. "Their words poison every gathering. They undermine law, they stir division, and now they dare to challenge me directly." Crow grunted. "You think I don't see it? They twist this town like a rope, pulling tighter with every scheme. But the people, some still admire them. Any move against them will look like tyranny unless it's carefully done." Raphael's voice hardened. "Then we do it carefully. Together." Thomas Whitfield entered soon after, his expression strained but resolute. "I know their ways, Pearl. She used me, made me believe I mattered. If you want them weakened, I can tell you how they think, how they turn words into weapons." Crow's eyes narrowed, his tone skeptical. "You're a man scorned, Thomas. That makes your help useful and dangerous. Do you want justice or revenge?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "What difference does it make if the end is the same?" Elsewhere in town, the sisters sensed the shifting current. Pearl noticed conversations that stopped abruptly when they entered a room. Priscilla caught hostile stares lingering longer than before. Phoebe listened and found fewer whispers to collect. People were speaking more carefully, afraid their words would return to them sharpened. One evening, Maria Delgado warned them outright. She closed the shutters of her shop and leaned in close. "Enemies who once stood apart now stand together. Raphael, Crow, even Thomas. Whatever wounds you dealt him, he now bleeds them into their hands. Be cautious." Priscilla scoffed. "Let them gather. A pack of jackals is still only jackals. We are wolves." But Phoebe's quiet eyes betrayed unease. "Wolves may be strong, but jackals can wear them down if they come together." The first sign of coordinated resistance came during a town gathering. Where once the sisters commanded attention, now voices rose against them. Caleb Briggs, emboldened by Raphael's support, declared loudly, "These girls speak only to serve themselves. They meddle in quarrels, twist trials, and seek profit from strife. They are no friends of Nacogdoches. They are its curse." Pearl rose calmly, her words as poised as ever. "A curse, Signor Briggs. If asking questions makes us a curse, perhaps it is silence you seek. But silence serves only those who fear truth." The crowd buzzed, split between admiration and suspicion. Yet this time the sisters felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Too many eyes turned toward Raphael and Crow, seeking guidance rather than bowing to the sisters' cleverness. That night, as they walked back to their cabin, the weight of the change pressed on them. Priscilla broke the silence first, her voice sharp. "So they think they can cage us? Let them try. I'd rather die fighting than live bowed." Pearl remained thoughtful, her face lit by the pale moon. This is no longer about clever words or bold defiance. They are weaving a net around us. We must learn the shape of it before it closes. Phoebe whispered, and when it does close, we must already be ready to cut ourselves free. The sisters had faced enemies before, but never united ones. The days of easy victories were over, and though they did not admit it aloud, each felt the stir of unease. The game they had mastered was changing, and this time they were not the only ones writing the rules. The alliance against the sisters did not strike with a single blow. It worked slowly, weaving snares around them like invisible threads. At first, the McCullens scarcely noticed. They continued to stir whispers, to charm and provoke, convinced their boldness could weather anything. But soon the signs became too sharp to ignore. Smugglers who once welcomed Pearl's negotiations began to avoid her, offering vague excuses about tighter patrols. Priscilla discovered that ranch hands who had once traded secrets now turned away when she approached, muttering about danger. Phoebe sensed the change most keenly. Silence. Where once words flowed freely for her to gather, now doors closed and eyes averted. Then came the failure that struck hardest. A deal with Ruiz, the smuggler they had courted, collapsed in humiliation. Promised goods never arrived, and whispers spread that the sisters themselves had betrayed the smugglers to Raphael. It was a lie, but one crafted too neatly to dismiss. In the tavern, men shook their heads and muttered, "Never trust a McCullen. They'll sell your secrets before you finish your drink." Priscilla seethed with rage. "It's Raphael. He poisons every ear against us. I'll drag the truth from Ruiz myself if I must." Pearl stopped her with a hand on her arm. "No, that is what they want, for us to lash out blindly. We must not give them the satisfaction." Yet her steady voice did little to hide the shadows beneath her eyes. Phoebe spoke little in those days, but when she did, her words were heavy. "We are losing the trust that made our words sharp. A blade without edge is only iron. Soon we will be nothing." The strain pressed even upon their unity. At night, their arguments grew sharper, their silences heavier. Priscilla accused Pearl of caution. "You hide behind words while our enemies act." "Sometimes you must strike," Pearl answered coldly, "and sometimes striking only tightens the noose." Phoebe, usually the peacemaker, surprised them both when she whispered, "Perhaps the noose is already tightening, and neither of you sees it clearly." The words stung more than any argument. For the first time, doubt crept not only into their dealings with others, but into their bond as sisters. Meanwhile, their enemies grew bolder. Raphael and Crow coordinated patrols that restricted movement of traders, choking off the sisters' avenues of influence. Thomas Whitfield, once humiliated, now stood publicly against them, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had shed his shame and replaced it with resolve. "They fooled me," he declared in the plaza, "but they will not fool the rest of you. Nacogdoches belongs to honest folk, not schemers who thrive on chaos." The crowd, once divided, cheered him. Maria Delgado, torn between affection and fear, sought out Phoebe one last time. In the quiet of her shop, she grasped the girl's hands. "Leave, Nina. Leave before they break you. There are other towns, other roads. Do not wait for the storm to fall." Phoebe's eyes shimmered with something unspoken. "We cannot leave. If we run, the whispers will follow us, and we will be hunted everywhere. Better to stand and fall on our own terms." Maria released her with trembling hands, knowing the decision was already made. By the end of summer, the sisters' power had dulled. They were still feared, still spoken of, but no longer untouchable. For the first time they were cornered, and though they still walked with pride, the air around them carried a heaviness, as if the town itself had decided their fate. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon when the alcalde announced a public hearing in the town square. The McCullen sisters were summoned not as witnesses or spectators, but as the accused. The charges were broad and heavy, inciting unrest, meddling in trials, corrupting trade, and endangering the fragile peace of Nacogdoches. Though no crime could be pinned to their hands, their words alone had become enough to condemn them. The plaza filled with townsfolk, their faces glistening under the relentless sun. Some came out of anger, others out of curiosity, but all sensed they were about to witness something final. Sheriff Elias Crow stood with arms folded, his expression hard, while Don Rafael Herrera, immaculate in his uniform, loomed with grim satisfaction. Pearl stepped forward first, her chin high, her voice carrying with deliberate calm. "We stand accused not of crimes but of questions. If questions are dangerous, then it is not we who should be feared, but the truths that follow them." Murmurs swept the crowd. A few nodded, but most looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Priscilla followed, her words cutting sharper. "You call us dangerous because we would not bow. If silence is the measure of virtue, then virtue is nothing but cowardice dressed as piety." Gasps rose, some in admiration, others in shock. Phoebe remained still, her voice emerging only after a long pause. "You do not fear what we have done, you fear what we might do. And fear is not justice, it is judgment dressed in chains." For a moment the sisters seemed to sway the crowd, their defiance igniting old doubts. But Don Rafael was ready. He stepped forward, holding up papers, ledgers, testimonies, letters collected from traders and townsfolk. His voice rang with authority. "Here is proof of their schemes, false promises to smugglers, manipulation of trials. Division sown between neighbors. These are not questions, they are calculated acts of disruption." The weight of evidence, however crafted, struck harder than the sisters' words. Murmurs shifted, admiration turning brittle. A woman in the crowd whispered, "I once thought them brave. Now I see only ruin." Thomas Whitfield, standing near the front, raised his voice for all to hear. "They fooled me once and I defended them. But I tell you now, they care for no one but themselves. Their loyalty is to power, and power alone." The crowd erupted, cheers and shouts blending into a tide the sisters could not stem. Pearl's face remained composed, but inside her chest burned with the weight of betrayal. Priscilla clenched her fists, fighting the urge to lash out. Phoebe closed her eyes briefly, as if memorizing the sound of the crowd turning against them. The alcalde raised his hand for silence. His voice, heavy with reluctance, declared the verdict. "Pearl, Priscilla, Phoebe McCullen, you are hereby banished from Nacogdoches. You shall leave by dawn tomorrow and not return upon pain of imprisonment." Gasps rippled again, but no voices rose in protest. The judgment was sealed. Priscilla spat at the ground, her words defiant. "You banish us because you cannot break us. But exile does not silence a name. You will remember us long after your tongues grow tired." Pearl added, her voice low but steady. "We leave not as beggars but as witnesses to your fear, and fear, signors, is harder to exile than flesh." Phoebe said nothing. Her silence, heavy and deliberate, carried more weight than words. The sisters walked out of the square together, their heads unbowed. Yet behind them, the sound of the crowd lingered, not whispers of admiration, but the finality of rejection. And as the sun sank low, painting the plaza in blood-red light, the triplets understood. Their reign in Nacogdoches had ended. The dawn of exile came heavy with silence. The streets of Nacogdoches, once alive with whispers of the McCullen name, now stood hushed as the sisters prepared to leave. Few dared to watch openly, but behind shutters and door frames, eyes lingered. Some watched with relief, others with regret, and a few with fear that their departure would not be the end, but only the beginning of a darker tale. Pearl walked at the front, her posture unbroken, though her heart carried the sting of betrayal more deeply than she would admit. Priscilla followed, her fists clenched, muttering under her breath. "They think they've won. Let them think it. Names outlast judgments." Phoebe brought up the rear, her gaze steady on the road ahead, already turning silence into memory, memory into warning. Sheriff Crow stood by the edge of town, his expression carved from stone. As they passed, he spoke low enough for only them to hear. "You had chances to turn back. You chose not to. Don't mistake pride for strength. Out there, the world is harsher than any judgment here." Pearl met his eyes. "Strength is not measured by safety, Sheriff. It is measured by how long a name endures." Don Rafael watched from horseback, his presence unmistakable. He did not speak, but the glint in his eyes said enough. satisfaction tempered by caution. For though the sisters were leaving, he knew exile was not the same as defeat. By midday the road stretched before them, framed by endless pines and the cry of distant crows. The air smelled of resin and dust, the kind of scent that clings to memory. Priscilla kicked at the dirt, her anger refusing to cool. "We should have burned that square to the ground, rather than walk away." Phoebe answered softly, "Fires fade, but words linger. They will tell our story even as they curse us." Pearl listened to them both, her mind racing ahead. "We are not finished. Towns are many, roads longer still. Wherever men fear boldness, they will whisper of us, and whispers are seeds. They grow in places no decree can reach." As the sisters disappeared into the horizon, their legend began to settle over Nacogdoches. Children whispered their names at night, daring each other to speak them 3 times as if conjuring spirits. Traders carried their story down the Sabine River, embellishing each retelling. Some painted them as villains, cunning and merciless, others as heroines who dared to defy the suffocating order of men. Truth dissolved into legend, and legend became stronger than fact. Maria Delgado, sewing by lamplight, murmured to herself, "They will not vanish, not girls like them. They will return in stories if not in flesh." Thomas Whitfield, despite his anger, felt a hollow ache as he worked his ranch. He could not erase Pearl's words, nor the fire of her eyes. His hatred was real, but so too was the ghost of longing. Sheriff Crow found no peace either. Each quiet night, he wondered whether he had protected the town, or merely delayed the storm the sisters would carry elsewhere. And Don Raphael, though satisfied in his victory, rode away with a deeper unease. He had faced rebels and bandits before, but never women whose weapons were words, whose defiance could not be silenced by chains. As for the sisters, their footsteps carried them beyond Nacogdoches, into the endless expanse of frontier. Their exile was not an ending, but a transformation. They had been judged, condemned, and cast out, yet in the act of rejection, the town had ensured their immortality. For legends are born not of safety but of scandal, not of silence but of voices too sharp to be buried. And so Pearl, Priscilla, and Phoebe McCullen walked into the vast unknown, too bold for the town that cast them out, too dangerous for the history books that preferred their names forgotten. But history forgets slowly, and legends whisper forever. So remember their story. And if you have not yet subscribed, now is the time, so you never miss tales like this one, stories that history tried to silence but could not. And when you finish here, don't stop. Click the next video on your screen and keep traveling with us through the shadows of the frontier.